Hi, my name is Yona. I'm the after-school leader at Field Teen Center, and I'm here to talk about Deathless Divide by Justina Ireland, which I listened to as an audiobook on Hoopla. This is the sequel to Dread Nation, which I do recommend reading or listening to first, but I liked this book maybe even more than the first one, and I think it has a lot to offer that the first book doesn't. Like Dread Nation, Deathless Divide is set in a version of the United States where the Civil War was ended not because the North won, but because zombies rose from the battlefield. So this is a world that has a lot of the same troubles that ours does. It's got racism, it's got sexism, it's got a lot of general inequality, and also zombies. The main characters, Jane and Catherine, are two teenage Black girls who have been trained in the arts of fighting the undead, because in this world, the responsibilities and risks of fighting the undead rest almost entirely on Black folks. Aside from their background, Jane and Catherine are quite different. Jane is a little reckless and headstrong. She doesn't care much about being a proper lady, and she has what she describes as an uneasy relationship with the truth. Catherine is quite literally tight-laced. She's always wearing a corset, even though Jane is scolding her not to. She's very proper, but she also cares a lot about her friends and really goes out of her way to take care of them. This book is set almost immediately after Dread Nation. Jane and Catherine and some of their friends are escaping from a frontier town that has fallen to a horde of shamblers. They're on their way to a new town where they hope they can resupply and maybe even meet up with some old friends. Things don't go too well though, because Jane is immediately thrown in jail for suspicion of having murdered the sheriff of the previous town. There's a mob of angry white folks from that town who want to see her hanged, and her friends and allies are trying to spring her loose, and there are some complications. And it does not even stop there. There are so many events that happen in this book, it almost feels like it could be 3 different books. Though it does all tie together, there's a big time jump in the middle. So we get to see really a lot of the United States in the 1700s from their perspectives. Each chapter alternates between Jane and Catherine's perspectives, so we get to see not just a big scope of what the United States is like, but we get to see 2 different perspectives on it. And the audiobook version, there are 2 different narrators for the 2 different sections, which was a nice touch. This book builds on some of the themes of the previous book. Dread Nation is mostly about naming and putting a face to systemic racism, namely the face of the undead and the faces of these white men and women who are seeking power and choose again and again to put Black folks in between themselves and danger rather than trying to make things more equal. Those themes don't go away. That's also part of this book. But Deathless Divide really builds on those ideas and also throws in some questions about vengeance and what that can do to a person, friendship, and the kinds of things we have to do to keep our friends, the lengths that people will go to solving their problems or fighting for their causes, even if it can hurt other people. And it also talks about allyhood in some ways that I find really interesting. Gideon Carter is a recurring character from the previous book. He is a young white guy. He's the son of the former mayor of Baltimore, and he's a scientist. And he cares a lot about trying to find a cure and a vaccine to prevent people from turning into shamblers. However, the lengths he's willing to go to and the people he's willing to put at risk to achieve this goal are kind of questionable. Jane certainly questions them, and the 2 of them are in conflict very directly for a lot of this book. This book also has a lot more queer content than the previous book. Dread Nation does hint very, very gently at the sexual identities of some of these characters, and in Deathless Divide, it's a big deal. Jane is bisexual, and that has a lot to do with the alliances that she makes and breaks with different characters. And Catherine is asexual, so she is constantly having to navigate this fine line between using her looks to get what she needs from these really controlling men around her, or making space for herself and not giving too much because she's not actually interested. And although they are the main characters, they're also not the only characters that we get to see in that way. A lot of the characters around them are queer. And even though there's a lot in this world that's not good and in some kind of transitional state in need of healing, queer identities are not one of them. It's pretty normal in this world, and that was nice to see. So I definitely recommend this book. I think Dread Nation is great. I think that this sequel adds something to it in a really big way and is definitely worth your time. It does have a trigger warning, being that they are fighting zombies. There's a lot of violence and blood and guts, and there are also some heavy themes. I do think that the adventure and the relationships between the characters and the banter make it palatable and you can get through it. But it does talk about systemic racism and violence against women and a lot of very heavy stuff. So keep that in mind going into it, but definitely check it out if you feel so inclined, and leave us a comment. Let me know what you think.